In the quiet corners of history, there are stories not often told. Stories shaped by human strength and human failure. This is one of those stories. The accounts we share now reach back through time to reveal moments that changed the world. Let us begin by traveling into a past long forgotten yet still echoing into our present. Thailand, as we know it should not exist. Twice its great capitals, Atwation and later Bangkok, were burned or besieged. Their monuments turned to ash and rubble. Ambitious neighbors cut away, its borders while powerful for an empires waited overhead. By all logic this should have been a broken land, swallowed by colonization or civil war. Yet against all odds Thailand not only survived it, endured, adapted and continuously remade itself. The keen eyes and an extraordinary ability to absorb and reshape outside influences. Rather than just copy foreign models, the Thai elite reimagined imported religions, laws and trade structures. They wove them into a local framework. What emerged was not a copy of India, China, or Europe, but a kingdom with its own distinct identity. One flexible enough to survive crisis after crisis. Long before anything called Thailand existed, Southeast Asia was a patchwork of small human groups. They were hunter-gatherers moving with the seasons, following rivers and forests for food. For thousands of years people here lived in ways not so different from others worldwide. They left behind stone tools and traces of fire pits as the earliest signs of their presence. What sets this region apart is how early it began to experiment with something far more lasting than hunting farming. From about 3500 BC, the growing of rice began to take root. This discovery places the ancestors of modern Thailand among the very first rice farmers on earth. Rice did not just provide food, it reshaped how people lived. Groups that once moved often now began to settle near fertile river valleys, putting down roots that would define the region's future. These river valleys, most notably the Mekong and the Chao Phraya, were not just places for farming. They became natural highways for the movement of goods and ideas long before kingdoms rose. These waterways created links between small communities that otherwise would have stayed apart. Archaeologists find that pottery styles, burial practices and tools spread between these areas, hinting at early networks of exchange. Burial sites show us fascinating details about how these people thought. Grave goods like decorated pots or well-made ornaments were placed carefully with the dead. Such practices suggest the beginnings of social order, where some individuals received more elaborate offerings than others. These small clues point toward growing complexity in society. If one site captures the prehistoric importance of this land, it is Ban Chang. Today it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But long before that it was an unassuming village until extraordinary finds were made there. Digs revealed a treasure of pottery tools and skeletons dating back thousands of years. Most importantly, they uncovered bronze items that broke old historical assumptions. For decades historians thought the Bronze Age began in places like Mesopotamia or China. Yet Ban Chang proved that bronze work existed here as early as 2000 BC, possibly earlier than those so-called birthplaces of civilization. The people of Ban Chang made tools and weapons strong enough for farming and hunting, but they also made jewelry and ornaments, a sign that artistry and social identity were already thriving beside practical needs. The pottery of Ban Chang adds another layer to this story. Painted in swirling spirals wave like patterns and rhythmic curves, these vessels are among the most known prehistoric artifacts in Southeast Asia. What makes them special is not only their age, but their lasting cultural impact. These designs remain so iconic that Thai school children today often copy them as part of their lessons. It is a reminder of how even distant ancestors continue to shape modern culture through symbols that outlived their makers by thousands of years. The region was never isolated even in prehistory. Evidence shows waves of migration coming from different directions. Austroasiatic-speaking peoples were among the earliest, leaving their language footprint across much of mainland Southeast Asia. Later Austronesian groups famous for their seafaring skills spread through islands and coastlines, bringing new skills and customs. These early movements made Thailand a crossroads from the very start, a place where languages, traditions, and technologies mixed. This blending did not stop in prehistory, but became a constant feature of the region's later story. Even with these finds, much of Thailand's earliest history stays wrapped in mystery. The people here left no written records. So what we know is pieced together through archaeology and anthropology. Every pot unearthed, every burial site mapped, every bone fragment studied helps us see how far back human presence goes and how sophisticated it had already become. Tools, farming, pottery, and rituals together built a foundation long before written chronicles or royal carvings appeared. What emerges from this early history is a clear picture. Thailand's story of adaptation and invention did not suddenly begin with kingdoms or dynasties. It had already started millennia earlier, when communities along rivers turned mud into rice fields, clay into pottery, and copper into bronze, setting the stage for centuries of culture to follow. Around the first few centuries of the Common Era, the lands that would become Thailand were no longer shaped only by local ways. Indian merchants, monks, and travelers arrived across coastal and river routes, carrying not just goods but systems of belief and political order. With them came the two great branches of Buddhism, Theravada with its focus on monastic discipline, and Mahayana, which offered wider devotional paths. Beside these faiths, Hindu gods and Brahman rituals also spread, changing how early Thai societies understood kingship in the world. The mixing of these influences shows contact with India was not just about trade, spices, or textiles. It was about ideas that redefined how rulers presented themselves and how cities showed their power. The networks that carried these ideas were tied to real political powers in the region. To the east and south, the Fun and Kingdom, based in what is now Cambodia and southern Vietnam, was one of the first great centers where Indian models of rule and religion were firmly planted. Fun's cultural reach extended into the Chao Phraya Basin, shaping how early communities they organized authority. When Fun faded, it was followed by Chen Lo, another Cambodian kingdom that kept this link to India's intellectual world. These neighboring powers held sway over emerging Thai polities, whether through direct control or through the prestige of adopting known cultural models. To be part of such a sphere meant access to trade networks that stretched far across the Indian Ocean. One of the most visible signs of this cultural change is the appearance of Sanskrit writing on Thai soil. In fact, the oldest known Sanskrit inscription in Southeast Asia comes from Thailand itself, dating to the 5th century CE. This is not just a language curiosity. It proves that leaders within the region sought legitimacy through Indian ideas of power. The inscriptions recorded gifts to temple, statements of kingship, and calls to gods. With such records, we see how rulers wanted their authority, understood not in local terms alone, but linked to broader ideas of cosmic order and divine rule. New urban centers played a key part in this early adaptation. Sites like Nakhon Pathom and Euthong emerged as busy nodes where trade and cultural exchange concentrated. Archaeologists uncovering these places find Buddhist stupas built in recognizably Indian styles, yet often mixed with local craft traditions. These cities became labs where imported ideas were reshaped to fit local society. The concept of the Deva Arya, or God King, also took root during this time. This model, which tied a ruler to divine authority, originally grew within Hindu Khmer traditions. Over time, it would serve as a base for Thai monarchs, whose legitimacy rested not just on military might, but on a cosmic link between king, state, and faith. The Indian epics also traveled beside religious and political systems. Stories like the Ramayana spread across islands, slowly retold in distinctly Thai forms. In time, these tales crystallized into the Ramayana, which reimagined Indian mythic heroes and villains in local settings. What began as borrowed literature ended up woven into royal ceremonies and classical performance, where it lives today as part of court, dance, and theatre. This long life shows just how deeply early transmissions planted themselves into cultural life. By the close of the 9th century, The adoption of Indian ideas of faith, monarchy and writing had laid a deep foundation. Local rulers had tools to present themselves as legitimate kings, not just tribal leaders. Cities had become centers of ritual and trade on par with others across Southeast Asia. The ideas that came with merchants and monks did not erase what was already here, but they created the thinking framework that would guide the rise of later kingdoms like Sukhothai and Daitwesha. By the 6th century, the cultural landscape of central Thailand had formed into something new. This was the Dharmavati period, remembered as the first distinctly known Buddhist civilization in the region. Unlike future kingdoms with clear borders and single rulers, Dharmavati did not work as a centralized empire. Instead, it was a loose network of independent city-states, each with its own leader while sharing a common religious and artistic culture. Among the most prominent centers were Nakhon Pathom, Lopburi and Uthul. Archaeological remains at these sites show city planning, walled settlements, and large religious monuments that confirm their role as powerful node of regional influence. The defining feature of Dharmavati identity was their Buddhism, which became firmly set in this era. Wooden monasteries and brick stupas were built to hold relics and sacred images, many of which still survive in fragments today. The spread of Buddhism was not only about new places of worship, but also about the regular use of Buddhist teachings in governance and society. Lay communities supported temples, rulers presented themselves as protectors of the faith, and monks traveled between settlements to spread doctrine. Dharmavati served as a spiritual bridge, taking ideas that started in India and localizing them until they became part of the region's own traditions. Art and architecture give the clearest evidence of how this blending took shape. Sculptures of the Buddha from the period are often distinct, marked by soft facial features, flowing robes, and a calm expression said to show inner compassion. Carved Dharma wheels, or wheels of the law, were placed on stones and set prominently within city sites, symbolizing the central role of Buddhist law in guiding life. The stupas themselves showed design choices inspired by Indian models, but their shapes and decorative elements speak to local creativity. Among the most striking features are early examples of the Prang-style towers that would later influence Thailand's most famous temples, including the famous Wat Hiran and Bangkok's entries later. Dharmavati also laid some of the earliest language and thinking foundations in Thai history. The Mon language, spoken by the people of these city-states, was written down using script, influenced by Indian writing systems. The Siddhas appeared writing in Pali, the language of their Buddhist text. These records, oft uncarved into stone or metal, preserve gifts to monasteries and descriptions of rituals, making Dharmavati one of the first literate societies of the region. This written tradition did more than document events. It articulated Buddhist ideas and linked Dharmavati at his elites with wider religious networks that stretched across South and Southeast Asia. At the same time, Dharmavati city-states held strategic spots along inland trade routes, making them valuable middlemen in the flow of goods. Ideas and merchandise from India passed through Dharmavati on their way toward the Khmer regions and later toward communities of Thai migrants arriving in the north. Archaeological finds of imported beads, ceramics and religious icons confirmed Dharmavati was both a receiver and a distributor of wider cultural influences. Material culture shows clearly this was not isolated growth, but part of a dynamic network connecting land and sea across Asia. The decline of Dharmavati stays less precisely defined. Slowly, Khmer expansion pressed into central Thailand, establishing Angkor-linked control over key sites. While to the south, the Srivijaya Empire grew its sea reach. Yet, even as political independence weakened, cultural features of Dharmavati endured. Buddhism kept its hold on the region, and artistic motifs carried forward into later kingdoms. Some of the city-states themselves never fully vanished, but instead shifted focus within larger regional polities. A striking detail is that certain Dharmavati stupas used architectural patterns that directly inspired later Thai sacred architecture, proving that innovation from this early period echoed for centuries. Coin evidence adds a final layer of interest. Coins made under Dvaravati rulers bore symbols like the Dharma wheel or other Buddhist images. These items stand among the earliest examples of Buddhist coinage in Southeast Asia, turning religious philosophy into official money. For a society so early in its formation, this merging of faith and economics revealed a sophisticated worldview. Devotion was not limited to the monastery, but stamped directly into the systems of daily exchange. In this sense, Dvaravati did not just promote Buddhism, it literally minted the Dharma into the lives of its people, leaving a legacy still visible in Thailand's cultural fabric today. By the 7th century, southern Thailand and the Malay Peninsula, a word drawn into the sphere of a powerful sea fort. The Srivijaya Empire, based in Sumatra. Srivijaya was not an empire ruled by vast armies. Its strength came from control of the seas. The kingdom dominated the Strait of Malacca, narrow water passage that served as the main route between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Whoever held this strait commanded one of the most important trade arteries of the ancient world. Ports in southern Thailand became vital outposts in this economic network, linking local communities to distant shores thousands of miles away. Among these ports, Chile and Nakhon Sith Emirates stand out as hubs that flourished under Srivijaya's protection. Set along the Gulf of Thailand, these cities connected inland resources with sea exchange. Archaeological evidence shows structures built during this time, including Buddhist sanctuaries and monastery complexes, that point to a rich intellectual and spiritual life. Chaya in particular still keeps a remarkable stupa whose design suggests links with both Indian architectural forms and local adaptations. The city was more than a stop for trade. Many historians believe it served as one of the regional capitals of the Srivijaya Empire, a claim locals today still embrace with pride. Religion was central to this process of connection. Srivijaya became a prominent center of Mahayana Buddhism, drawing monks and scholars from across Asia. Chinese records mention that monks from the Tang dynasty studied in Srivijaya-controlled lands before traveling on to India for higher learning. This role as a religious gateway gave southern Thailand more than commercial importance. It became part of a spiritual network that spanned multiple continents. Sanskrit inscriptions, Buddhist icons and temple foundations from the region reveal the deep cultural mark left by this flow of knowledge and practice. The cosmopolitan nature of Srivijaya's ports cannot be overstated. Archaeological finds from southern Thailand tell of contact with traders from across the globe. Indian merchants brought textiles, pearls, and religious writings. Chinese traders brought ceramics and silks in exchange for forest products and special goods Southeast Asia made in abundance. There is evidence of items from the Middle East arriving as far as the Thai Peninsula, including Persian glass, while Roman and Byzantine coins filtered in along these routes. The image that appears is not of isolated coastal settlements, but of a marketplace where cultures and economies overlapped. Crucially, Srivijaya, as reach over southern Thailand, was not expressed through direct imposition of centralized rule. While there may have been some political oversight, what mattered most was economic and cultural integration. By guarding shipping lanes and supporting stable trade, Srivijaya let port cities thrive. In return, these cities embraced the empire's religious and cultural direction. This form of indirect influence shows the flexibility of Srivijaya's power. It mattered less whether armies marched inland and more whether sailors, merchants, and monks saw Srivijaya as the guarantor of the seas. This period marks the first time we see the peoples of Thailand actively taking part in a global trading system. Early inland networks had linked communities to Indian Cambodia, but under Srivijaya, the coastlines of Thailand became open gates to the wider world. The trade patterns set here foreshadowed the later prominence of Thailand as a center of regional commerce. Centuries later, Asia and Bangkok would inherit this role, but the roots of sea engagement trace back to these Srivijayan ports. Chinese sources leave us with a striking image. They noted that in Srivijaya controlled regions of Thailand markets overflowed with goods from every corner of Asia. Traders could find Persian glass vessels as easily as Roman coins mixed with Indian beads or Chinese porcelain. Few other locations show so clearly how connected the medieval world had already become. That such a scene unfolded in Peninsular Island shows the strategic and cultural weight of this corner of Southeast Asia. Even today, the surviving Chedi at Chaya is remembered not just as a religious monument, but also as a symbol of the time when southern Thailand stood as part of a sea empire linking east and west. By the 9th century, the Khmer Empire, based at Angkor in present-day Cambodia, became the dominant political and cultural force in mainland Southeast Asia. Its influence reached deep into what is now northeastern and central Thailand. This expansion was not just about armies taking new lands. The Khmer set up provincial centers that acted as administrative and religious hubs, making sure their authority was tied to both governance and sacred order. Areas like Lopburi, once known as Lovapora, became important outposts of Khmer power, integrating Thai territory into a larger imperial system that stretched across much of the region. At Lopburi and other sites, provincial centers showed clear signs of Khmer organization. Roads and reservoirs tied them into the vast infrastructure meant to bind the empire together. Inland trade routes connected directly back to Angkor, and religious monuments expressed the political authority of Khmer rulers in stone. In central Thailand, Phai Mai grew into one of the most remarkable Khmer outposts. It was not just a provincial town. It stood as a mirror of Angkor itself, complete with a huge temple complex that remains one of the finest examples of Khmer architecture outside Cambodia. These sites confirm that Thailands were not peripheral to Khmer ambitions, but key parts of their administrative and religious network. Khmer culture brought a religious and cosmic world view deeply rooted in a mix of Hinduism and Buddhism. The concept of the Dev Arroyo, or God King, stood at the center of Khmer statecraft. Rulers presented themselves as earthly forms of divine power, keeping legitimacy by linking the monarchy to a greater cosmic order. Writings from this period in Sanskrit and Khmer recorded acts of devotion, temple building, and royal orders. For the first time in this region, rulers clearly framed their power in terms of cosmic kingship, creating a legacy that would sway time on arcs for centuries. Architectural achievements supported this thinking. Temples like Prositach, in Phai Mai in Nakhon Ratchasima, and Phanan, Rung in Burma province, were built with the grandeur of Angkor in mind. Made for Hindu gods but later used for Buddhist worship. They used massive sandstone blocks carved with detailed scenes showing mythical stories. Their scale shows the resources Khmer rulers could move far from Angkor, while their design shows how sacred architecture was meant to copy Mount Meru, the cosmic center of Hindu-Buddhist belief. These temple complexes set a model for huge religious building that future Thai kingdoms would continue, even making their own unique versions. Infrastructure was another lasting gift. The Khmer Empire built large Ba-Rao reservoirs within its heartland to support agriculture on a big scale. Similar systems appeared in Khmer-controlled areas of Thailand, allowing more intense rice farming than local communities had done before. With reservoirs and canals moving water to fields, farmers could grow extra crops, which in turn supported larger populations and the growth of city centers. Such systems show how Khmer influence reached beyond temples and into the practical organization of daily life. This period saw the introduction of huge stone building into central Thailand. Before Khmer growth, local construction had used more wood and earth. The shift to stone pushed by imperial temple building changed how societies in this region thought about permanence in sacred space. Structures from this time remain central heritage sites today, while their methods laid foundations for later Thai architectural achievements. Decline, however, came by the 13th century. Internal problems began to weaken the Khmer Empire. While in the north and west, Thai-speaking groups were forming new political orders. The authority of Khmer outposts in Lopburi and Phai Mai faded as local leaders aligned with rising powers. Yet even as direct rule, blended Khmer cultural and political models had already been woven into the social fabric of Thailand. The scale of Khmer ambition can still be seen in its infrastructure. The road from Angkor to Phai Mai stretched over 225 kilometers, equipped with stone rest houses and direction markers, evidence of a carefully planned system not unlike a modern highway. The Phai Mai itself, the temple complex, is lined up exactly toward Angkor, proof of the connected religious and political vision that crossed national boundaries as we know them today. These achievements highlight the extraordinary reach of the Khmer world and the depth of its influence on the lands that later became part of Thailand. Between the 10th and 13th centuries, a quiet but important change began to reshape the population of the region. Groups known as the Thai people started migrating slowly from southern China into the valleys and uplands of what is now northern and central Thailand. This movement was not a sudden invasion, but a slow, steady flow of communities looking for fertile land and more secure home. Over generations, these small groups settled into areas beside existing Hmong Khmer and other cultures, eventually becoming a dominant presence. By the time they set up permanent states, the Thai had already placed themselves as a majority ethnic and cultural force in parts of the region. One key reason for their success lay in farming. Thai communities brought with them advanced knowledge of wet rice cultivation, which needed coordinated irrigation and systematic work. Wet rice farming allowed higher yields than most earlier farming methods, supporting dense populations that could form lasting communities. Unlike the grand city centers of the Khmer, a society centered on smaller village-based networks where cooperation within extended families and clans was essential. This style of organization favored stability in upland valleys and fertile plains and provided the base on which larger political bodies could eventually grow. Unlike the conquering powers of the Khmer, the Thai did not spread mainly through war or force. They fitted themselves into existing landscapes, adopting local customs, religions, and administrative practices while keeping their own language. This balance between adopting what was useful and keeping what defined their identity helped the Thai thrive in multicultural settings. Temples originally tied to Hmong or Khmer religious authority were shared or rethought within Thai communities, while Buddhist and Hindu practices blended with their own traditions of ancestor respect. Over time, this approach created societies where old and new identities merged rather than clashed. Language became a key tool in this cultural adaptation. Early Thai dialects took in large amounts of Sanskrit and Pali vocabulary, especially in areas of religion, governance, and law. In some areas, the Thai began trying written scripts inspired by Indian models, an important step toward the development of later Thai writing. As a spoken and later written language, Thai was practical enough to describe daily farming life, yet flexible enough to carry sacred ideas and political thinking borrowed from older civilizations. This growth helped preserve Thai identity while linking it to larger cultural and religious systems already set in Southeast Asia. As populations grew, Thai settlements became organized into units called mu'ing. Each mu'ing worked as a city-state with its own leader armies and surrounding villages, yet none sought full independence from the shared Thai cultural sphere. Kinship networks and shared traditions linked these mu'ing into a broader cultural system, even when each local ruler followed his own interest. This model differed sharply from the centralized control of the Khmer Empire, but it proved sustainable in mountainous land, where smaller flexible units could last better than a single large state. The geography of upland, northern Thailand around present-day Chiang Rai and Chiang Mai gave safe zones for Thai migrants. These areas were less open to Khmer domination, giving settlers the security to build farming bases and political centers. From these strongholds, Thai populations slowly spread south into central valleys, widening their influence without starting huge conflicts. The process was so gradual and wide that when kingdoms began to appear, Thai culture was already deep in much of the land. Thai society also developed a distinct form of local authority. At the village level, leaderships entered on the chow, or chief, who worked like a minor king within his community. The authority of the chow rested on kinship, control of land and ritual power. In time, some families trace their line back to these local chiefs, claiming continuity across centuries. Even today, stories of descent from early chow families remain part of local identity in northern Thailand. In these centuries of migration and settlement, no great empire was built, but the ground was laid for kingdoms yet to come. What emerged was a cultural landscape where neither conquest nor assimilation erased older identities. Instead, the Thai reshaped and combined them into the framework that would later define Thailand's political and cultural evolution. In 1238, a new political order rose in central Thailand that later generations would celebrate as the first truth, like Kingdom Sukhothai. Unlike the foreign-dominated systems before it, was remembered as a state made and ruled by Thai-speaking peoples themselves. Later Thai accounts painted it as a golden age marked by peace, prosperity, and the birth of a national identity, even if those stories were written centuries after the kingdom's peak. What stays clear is that Sukhothai introduced patterns that shaped Thai society and rule for centuries to come. One of its standout rulers was King Ramkhamhaeng. He is widely credited with developing the Thai script in the late 13th century using Mer and Mo models while making an alphabet fit for his people. The script he made became the backbone of written Thai, surviving with changes into present-day use. This innovation gave the kingdom the ability to record laws, religious texts and royal writings in its own language, rather than rely only on Sanskrit or Khmer. Beyond writing, Ramkhamhaeng promoted a vision of kingship different from the divine monarchies around him. He styled himself as a father of the people, suggesting a ruler approachable to his subjects, rather than a distant god-king above them. The religious scene under Sukhothai also changed. Importantly, Theravada Buddhism became the official faith of the kingdom, strengthening unity both inside its borders and across tributary states. Monks and temples received royal support, and Buddhist teaching informed the moral legitimacy of rulers. This focus set Sukhothai's identity apart from its Khmer neighbors, who kept strong Hindu traditions beside Buddhism. Religion was not only a spiritual base, but also an administrative tool, binding scattered communities into a shared worldview that made Sukhothai's authority valid. Foreign relations show how open the kingdom was to exchange. Records kept by Yu Unshin describe Sukhothai called Siam as a land known for stability, wealth, and an eagerness to take part in trade diplomacy. Goods like ceramics, forest products, and elephants moved out of the kingdom in return for textiles, luxury items, and recognition from China's imperial court. These links placed Sukhothai as an integrated part of Asia's wider trade networks. Unlike many kingdoms that relied on rigid conquest, Sukhothai spread influence through trade, diplomacy, and a system of tribute. Visually, Sukhothai left a legacy through art and architecture that stays distinct. Sculptures made Buddha images known for elegant proportions, gentle facial expressions, and poses, symbolizing both common spiritual power. These differed from the heavier, more rigid images of earlier Khmer traditions. Architecture showed lotus bud-shaped chedis in temple layouts that stressed openness and harmony with their surroundings rather than sheer size. Together, these artistic choices reflected the spiritual ideals of Theravada Buddhism and the softer vision of rulership that set the kingdom apart. The way Sukhothai used its authority followed a model of Southeast Asia, where political control spread from the center across an network of smaller, semi-independent tributary states. Instead of holding distant lands directly, Sukhothai loyalty through symbolic recognition of its king, religious support, and trade links. This loose arrangement created a lasting system for a time, but it lacked the centralized strength that might resist stronger rivals over the long term. By the 15th century, the power of Sukhothai faded. The kingdom was slowly absorbed into the growing influence of Asia, which would soon dominate the region. Despite its decline, Sukhote-esque ultraland political gifts remained basic to Thai identity. Temples, writings and artistic styles from this period kept influencing later dynasties and still shaped Thailand's sense of history today. One extraordinary detail adds mystery to the story. The famous Ramkhaming inscription of 1290, too long thought to be Thailand's first historical document, may not actually date from his reign. Some scholars argue it was written much later, raising questions about how the image of Sukhote was purposely shaped by later generations. Another interesting feature of Sukhote's history is its notable water management system with ceramic pipes channeling water into man-made ponds. These early water engineering methods remain of interest to modern Thai engineers, linking the cleverness of the 13th century with practices studied in the present. In 1296, King Mang Roi founded the city of Chiang by setting it as the capital of a new political body, the Lan Na Kingdom. For centuries afterward, Lan Na became the dominant power in northern Thailand, separate from both Sukhote and Aitwasia. From the start, it carved out an identity of its own with its own language known as Khmer, its own writing system and a culture that reflected the distinct mountain world it occupied. The name Lan Na itself means a million rice fields, a title that caught the farming wealth of its valleys and the importance of growing food to sustain its people. The geography of the kingdom shaped much of its history. Set in fertile basins surrounded by mountain ranges, Lan Na sat at a crossroads of trade routes linking China to the north, Burma to the west, and other Thai polities to the south and east. Its strategic spot let it work as a regional channel, drawing merchants, religious followers and artisans. Though not as vast as Land Empire's, Lan Na made up for it with control of trade corridors that gave it both wealth and cultural variety. This setting encouraged the growth of a political order suited to mountainous land, balancing farm production with access to outside goods and ideas. Religion played a central role in the kingdom's sense of purpose. Theravada Buddhism was deep in daily life and shaped how rulers presented themselves. Temples served as cultural anchors, not only places of worship, but also schools for copying manuscripts and keeping sacred texts. Monks held influential roles in both education and moral authority. Distinct Lan Na stupas with their rounded bases and tapering spires marked the skyline of Chiang Mai under the city centers. These architectural forms became signs of the kingdom's devotion as well as its artistic creativity. Lan Na's artistic gifts remain visible today. Craftsmen became known for wood carving, which decorated temples with detailed panels of mythical and floral designs. Gold work and silver work flourished, making ritual objects and ornaments valued within and beyond the kingdom. Sculpture also stood out as an important achievement, especially in showing the Buddha. Statues from Lan Na mixed graceful flow with strong forms, creating a style that influenced northern Thai art for centuries. These traditions became so set that regional artisans still keep these styles, maintaining a link with their medieval past. Politically, Lan Na faced a turbulent path. At times it aligned with neighbors like Sukhote, recognizing the shifting balance of power in the region. At other times, it resisted pressure, especially from the growing Burmese kingdom. By the 16th century, however, Lan Na fell under repeated Burmese control, often reduced to vassal status. Times of occupation weakened its independence. Though even under unrule, its cultural practices stayed vibrant. The longevity of its language, script and religious customs shows how resilient identities survived despite political losses. The endurance of Lan Na's legacy is seen not only in art and architecture, but also in its myths and traditions. One of the most striking stories explains the founding of Wat Phra, the Doi Salop located on a mountain overlooking Chiang Mai. According to legend, a sacred relic was placed on the back of a white elephant which climbed the mountain, trumpeted 3 times, and then died at that spot. This was taken as divine guidance and the temple was built there. To this day, it remains one of Thailand's most respected religious sites. In 1350, King Ramathibhi I founded the Aitwasia kingdom along the Chao Phraya River. Its location was no accident. The river gave fertile farmland, while also linking inland communities to the sea. From this base, Aitwash grew into the longest-lasting and most dominant Thai empire of the early period. For over 4 centuries, it held vast territories and served as the central hub of political, economic, and cultural life in the region. Aitwash became a cosmopolitan empire in a way few other Southeast Asian states could match. Envoys from Persia, China, India, and Japan brought goods and knowledge to its court, while Europeans, including Portuguese, Dutch, and French visitors, set up relations during the 16th and 17th centuries. The capital took in influences from these regions while keeping a distinctly Thai identity. International traders found a city full of canals, busy markets, and huge temples. For Aitwash's rulers, managing this diverse setting needed both flexibility and strength. The kingdom adopted a model of kingship much different from the fatherly style linked with earlier Sukhoti. Aitwash's rulers embraced the idea of divine kingship, inspired by the Khmer Deva royal system, but mixed with Theravada Buddhist thinking. The king was shown not as a fatherly protector, but as a semi-divine figure whose moral and cosmic authority placed him far above ordinary subject. This view of kingship supported the centralization of power and let Aitwash's rulers stand as unquestioned heads of the state. Administration backed this vision. The kingdom developed an organized bureaucracy run by noble families, tied to the palace by loyalty and rank. The Sakdina system gave land and authority according to a scale of number rankings. Nobles, monks, soldiers, and even common farmers were given a fixed place in this order. This allowed centralized control while making sure resources from labor, land, and military service were well shared. Aitwash's bureaucracy became one of the most complex systems in Southeast Asia, a sheen strong enough to hold the kingdom together across centuries of internal pressures and outside threats. Aitwash's wealth and strength were visible in its architecture. At its peak, the capital city was one of the largest urban centers in the world, matching London and Paris by 1700. Its skyline included huge temple complexes like Wat Phra Singh and Phet, where golden stupas and towering prang structures dominated the view. These temples served both religious and political roles, symbolizing the mix of Buddhism with royal authority. City planning stressed canals and causeways, making Aitwash the both reachable and defensible, while learning it a name among European travelers as the Venice of the East. Military power supported its long life. Armies used war elephants, which acted as living tanks in battle, crushing opposition and scaring rival states. Guns got through for on contact, added force to traditional weapons, while the nobility gave organized leadership in war. With these tools, Aitwash beat neighboring polities, taking in the remains of Sukhoti, pressing into land, not unfinally absorbing Khmer-controlled areas. Growth and consolidation let Aitwash hold authority over a wide and diverse population. Culture thrived in this setting. Literature reached new heights with works like Lilith Frol mixing poetry with romance and moral tales. Performing arts, court dance and music grew under royal support, showing the refinement of the court to both local audiences and foreign envoys. Sculpture, especially religious art, continued traditions from earlier kingdoms while developing forms that came to define Thai aesthetics for centuries. In this cultural flowering, Aitwash created a legacy that lasted far beyond its fall. At its peak, Aitwash's population passed 1 million residents. Traders and diplomats who visited spoke of its size and splendor. French King Louis VI I've even received ambassadors from Aitwash, whose presence in Paris caused a wave of fascination at Versailles. Their exotic dress and presentation influenced French fashion trends, spreading silk and embroidered designs taken from Siamese models. Such stories show how deeply Aitwash impressed even distant audiences. By the mid-18th century, Aitwash remained a dominant Southeast Asian power. Its capital was still one of the largest in the world, filled with huge temples, trade networks that reached Europe and Asia, and a royal court that commanded attention abroad. Yet under this surface strength, instability was building. Succession disputes weakened the hold of its monarchs. Regional governors began using more independence and the kingdom was stretched thin from overreach. To the west, a growing Burmese state under the Colonial dynasty was becoming more aggressive. The stage was set for conflict that would test Asia-s resilience like never before. The Burmese-Siamese War of 1765 to 1767 was not the first fight between the two nations, but it proved the most destructive. King Shinbi, or Yushin of Burma, launched a major invasion, aiming to permanently break Siamese power. Burmese forces pushed deep into territory, moving on both northern and southern fronts, cutting Asia off from help and supplies. The capital, founded by an organized Burmese military, set on finishing what earlier invasions had only started. For 14 months, Asia endured a long siege. Supplies ran low, sickness spread inside city walls. The once mighty city, with its temples, palaces, and markets, turned into a desperate fortress. Burmese soldiers built blockades, broke out of defenses, and waited for starvation and exhaustion to do their work. Thai resistance was strong, but spirit faded as the siege dragged on. In April of 1767, the Burmese finally stormed the capital, bringing centuries of glory to a sudden, unterrible end. The fall of the city was total. Asia was burned to the ground, its temples wrecked by fire, its elaborate palaces looted, and its libraries turned to ashes. Priceless manuscripts holding records of political history, religious teachings, and literary works were lost forever in the flame. The artistic achievements and chronicles that had defined the kingdom's cultural life vanished in days. The mental impact of this destruction hit harder than the military loss. A civilization that had dominated Southeast Asia for over 400 years seemed to collapse in a single moment. When Asia fell, the central administration of the kingdom fell with it. Without a working palace or monarch to command loyalty, Siam split into smaller regions. Surviving noble soldiers and common people scattered into the countryside, taking shelter where they could. Local warlords and governors set up temporary rule in different provinces, but none could claim the legitimacy Asia-s kings had once held. The empty space of authority left Siam in a state of chaos, with no clear path toward recovery. Out of this collapse, one figure rose who would soon reshape Siam's fortune. A military leader named Tax, and began gathering support to the south in Thunbier across the river from future Bangkok. With will and skill, he started rebuilding an army from scattered survivors, laying the ground for national recovery. Thaksin's rise marked the move from Asia's destruction toward a new chapter in Thai history. When Asia fell to the Burmese in 1767, Siam looked broken beyond repair. The capital lay in ruins, the royal court had collapsed, and across the countryside small warlords began carving out territories for themselves. Into this chaos stepped a military commander named Tax, and a man of mixed Chinese and Thai blood, who proved one of the most remarkable figures in Thai history. With only a small force at his side, he moved toward the east, gathered survivors and soldiers, and began a campaign of vast reconquest. Within the same year Asia was destroyed, he had made a new capital across the Chao, a river at Thunbier, a place chosen for practical reasons more than grandeur. What mattered to him most was speed and security. Thunbier lacked the ornate palaces, temples, and symbolic landscapes that had defined Asia, but it held strategic value. Set along the river, it was defensible and had enough trade access to support his growing army. From this based Axe and coordinated an amazing series of campaigns. He rallied men still shaken from the fall of their kingdom, used the river for fast movement of troops, and outmaneuvered both the Burmese armies and the competing Siamese warlords. In only a few years, centralized unity returned under his authority. Thaksin's success was not only military. He built legitimacy through Buddhism, publicly showing himself as a supporter of the faith. He funded temples, welcomed monks, and encouraged the rebuilding of sacred structures destroyed in the war. Yet his tie with religion became more complex over time. Known for intense meditation practices, he claimed mystical experiences and later began to suggest a kind of divine role for himself, crossing the line between king and spiritual figure. This worried many within the monkhood, who saw such claims as dangerous and out of step with orthodox Buddhism. Despite that tension, he stayed a tireless warrior king. Campaign after campaign extended Siamese reach once more. He marched north to land no, securing Cheng by unstrengthening Thai influence there. He sent troops into the Lao regions, projecting control over Vientiane and Luang Prabang. He did not stop at taking back old borders. He also moved down the Malay Peninsula, bringing tributary states back under Siamese sway. Each win restored both confidence and prestige, signaling to neighbors that Siam had survived its disaster and remained a regional power. But with growth came strain. Rebuilding after decades of war needed more than conquest. Resources stretched thin, and heavy demands on labor and rice collection created discontent. Rebellions began flaring in parts of the kingdom he had only recently united. By the late 1772, mutinies and plots against him surfaced, weakening his image. His growing mystical claims of divine authority did not unite the elite but divided them. Isolation grew around him, and the fragile balance he had made started to break apart. In 1782 his reign ended. His untrusted general Chauv, Chokri, returned from a campaign in Cambodia to take power. Taksin was removed and Chokri set himself as King Ramai, founding the Chokri dynasty that continues in Thailand today. Though Thun Bier stopped being the capital, replaced by Bangkok across the river, its brief role had been decisive. It served as the critical bridge between destruction and renewal, proving that even after a terrible fall, Siam could reorganize. In 1782, a powerful general named Chauv Chokri returned from campaigning in Cambodia to find instability spreading through Siam. King Taksin had pushed away large parts of the elite. Rebellions were gaining strength, and the fragile unity restored after as destruction was failing again. Seeing both the danger and the chance, Chok moved decisively. He removed tax and took the throne and used the royal name Ramai. With that act, he started the Chokri dynasty, and remarkably the line he began still rules over Thailand today, more than 2 centuries later. His first task was not just seizing power, but giving the kingdom a proper base from which survival and growth were possible. Rather than stay in Thon Bier, which had always been seen as a temporary fix, Rama looked across the Chauv River to Ratan Acres, an island. Here he began creating a new capital designed to echo the grandeur of Asia while avoiding its weaknesses. Building projects started right away. The Grand Palace was made to serve as both a royal home and symbolic center of rule. Within its walls, Wat Phra was built as the kingdom's most sacred temple, holding the Emerald Buddha, which he carefully moved from its earlier home. In doing this, Raman not only secured a capital, he gave Siam a renewed cultural heart that linked the present with the memory of its former glory. Restoring stability involved more than physical structures. After decades marked by foreign invasion and civil disorder, government systems needed rebuilding. Rama I reorganized the administration, strengthened the roles of provincial officers, and reasserted the authority of the central monarchy. Buddhism was actively backed to support both moral order and legitimacy. Monks received support, temples were fixed, and religious learning was revived. These steps helped remake a sense of national identity at a time when memories of Asia as fall still weighed heavy. Cultural revival was also a key part of his plan. Rama ordered a careful review and update of the kingdom's legal code, setting standard laws so that local differences would no longer weaken authority. He supported a big effort to keep Buddhist texts, having scholars collect and compile copies to replace those lost in Asia as burning. Literature and performing arts also gained new life. One of his most famous gifts was overseeing the recreation of the Ramayana, a version of the Indian Ramayana epic. More than a work of fun, it served as a base of Thai literature, painting and dance, celebrated in murals and shows that continue today. This revival also came with a rethought model of kingship. The more fatherly style of rule linked with Sukhoti had long since faded, but Rama carefully balanced ideas of divine kingship drawn from Khmer traditions with a stronger bureaucratic frame. Provincial rulers were kept under closer watch with tighter links to the central administration. This balance of sacred authority and state organization gave the new dynasty the tools it needed to last. Challenges remained, especially from Burma. Only a few years into his reign, the kingdom faced a huge Burmese try to invade, remembered as the Nine Armies War of 1785 to 1786. True to its name, the invasion involved many coordinated Burmese forces pressing into Siamese land from different directions. Rama laid coordinated defenses and with help from his brother and trusted generals managed to push back the threat. This win reinforced Siam's survival and confirmed the new dynasty had both legitimacy and strength. Diplomatic strategy was equally important. While securing positions at home, Rama I kept careful relations with Vietnam and sent tribute to China, ensuring peace with two powerful neighbors. Such alliances gave Siam time to rebuild without facing overwhelming outside pressure. Bangkok, the city he founded, would grow into one of Asia's great capitals. Its official ceremonial name, written in Thai and made by Rama I himself, is amazingly long, with over 160 characters, holding the title of the world's longest place name. More simply, it is called Krung Napi by locals. Within its grand palace complex, the Emerald Buddha stays, the most sacred religious object in the kingdom. And in a tradition started under Rama I, only the king himself or his highest representative may change seasonal robes 3 times each year. This continuity links the present time monarchy directly with the vision first set in 1780 to when Rama I turned a fragile state into the foundations of a modern nation. The early Retin echoes in era opened with Bangkok as the center of a kingdom trying to rebuild itself. After the disaster of Asia fall and the short time of Thunbier, the first 4 kings of the Chakri dynasty had to restore not only stability but also legitimacy. This task meant enforcing order, protecting borders, and remaking the cultural and religious institutions that had made Siam a united state in the first place. From Rama I to Rama IV, the dynasty worked step by step to unite powers, set out the foundations of identity the country still values today. The most urgent problem was the defense of Siamese borders. Burma stayed the greatest immediate threat, and throughout the reigns of Rama I and Rama I, many campaigns were fought to stop invasion. Siamese forces also moved outward against Laos and Cambodia, bringing vassal states under tighter watch, while in the south parts of the Malay Peninsula were made to send tribute. These military efforts were about survival, but they also confirmed Siam's return as a regional power, only a few decades from complete collapse. Success on the battlefield strengthened the authority of the new dynasty at home. At the same time, Siam handled a careful balancing act with other neighbors. Vietnam was pressing west, competing with Siam for influence in Cambodia and Laos. Confrontation was frequent, and each side tried to secure loyalty from local rulers. Meanwhile, King China remained an unavoidable power. The Chakri kings continued Asia's tradition of sending tribute missions to the Chinese Empire, both to make their reign valid and to ensure trade access. Unlike many areas of Southeast Asia, which by the early 1800s were falling into direct European colonial control, Siam's position was kept stable through diplomacy. The dynasty saw that survival depended on cautious foreign relations, which bought them precious time. Stability at home let cultural life flourish once more. Rama's court supported mural painting and the retelling of epic literature, rooting the new capital in strong symbols of Thai identity. Under Rama I, court drama and poetry grew in skill. Poets became important figures, and dramatic shows backed by the palace gave the era distinct artistic prestige. These forms of expression connected the people to a sense of continuity, despite the upheaval of recent generations. Rama I, who ruled from 1824 to 1851, further encouraged temple building and city development. Many of the temples that dominate central Bangkok today trace major restoration back to his rule. Wat Pho in particular was fixed as both a religious site and a place of learning. Without printing technology, time monks carved Buddhist texts onto more than 1,400 marble slabs placed around the temple's courtyards, effectively making the first permanent public library in the world. This effort kept vast amounts of religious and philosophical knowledge for future generations, showing how intellectual life adapted without paper-based mass copying. Daily life in Bangkok showed the growth of the new capital. The city expanded along its canals, which were both for transport and for defense. So central were these waterways that Western visitors began calling Bangkok the Venice of the East. Up until the mid-19th century, most ordinary travel was done by boat, with homes and markets clustering close along the canals. The image of the city as a floating community lasted, even as later kings brought roads and new infrastructure. Though Western powers like the British and Americans began appearing at Siamese ports, during this period contact stayed limited. The dynasty preferred to keep trade and diplomacy, careful wary of the fates of neighboring states that were increasingly falling under colonial control. This cautious stance delayed major confrontation, but hinted at the reforms that would come with King Mongkut later in the 19th century. What the early Chokri kings managed in these years was vital. They rebuilt order after loss, kept cultural and religious continuity, and gave Siam enough strength to handle the coming century on its own terms. King Mongkut, who ruled from 1851 to 1868, as Rama IV is remembered as one of Siam's most scholarly and forward-looking monarchs. Before taking the throne, he lived as a Buddhist monk for 27 years, diving into religious learning, meditation, and language study. This long time outside the royal court shaped his personality and outlook. Unlike his warrior ancestors, Mongkut approached leadership with the tools of a thinking intellectual. He believed deeply in the value of knowledge, whether drawn from Buddhist scripture or from the modern sciences spreading across the world. His reign marked the start of a decided shift in Siamese strategy to survival, modernization, diplomacy, and selective engagement with the West. The Southeast Asia of his era was under pressure from colonial growth. The British had taken Burma into their empire, and the French were beginning to press into Vietnam and Cambodia. Mongkut saw that Siam could not stand against these powers through military strength alone. Instead of resisting all foreign contact, he looked for ways to show Western governments that Siam was a stable and civilized nation worth dealing with as a partner, not a conquest. His solution was to accept certain forms of Western influence and use them diplomatically to strengthen the kingdom's standing. One of his most important acts was opening Siam to foreign trade through treaties. The most famous was the Bowring Treaty of 1855 with Britain. This agreement reduced royal control over commerce and gave major privileges to British traders, including lower tariffs and extraterritorial rights. While the treaty limited some of Siamese sovereignty over economic affairs, it served a bigger goal, preventing outright colonization. By showing willingness to work with Western demands for freer trade, Mongkut bought the kingdom's security at a time when neighboring countries were losing independence to colonial powers. He balanced these political and economic strategies with cultural and intellectual reform. Mongkut was an eager student of Western science, especially astronomy and math. He applied these new methods within the monkhood, encouraging forms of what came to be seen as rational Buddhism that resisted superstition and stressed clear reading of scripture. This reform was subtle but important. It let Buddhism adapt to a changing world while keeping its central role in Siamese identity. He reorganized the Buddhist order, promoted discipline among monks, and built a name for mixing traditional faith with modern reason. Missionaries were active in Siam during his reign, and though Mongkut resisted mass conversion or heavy foreign interference, he let Christian schools and hospitals work. He saw that Western-style education and medicine could help the kingdom, even if Christianity itself did not replace Buddhism. In a famous case, he hired a British woman named Analia Nowens as a teacher for his household. Her experiences later inspired the fictionalized story of the king, and although the real relationship was far more formal and practical, aimed at exposing his heirs to foreign languages and knowledge. Mongkut's engagement with Western science reached a dramatic peak in 1868, when he used his own astronomical calculations to predict a solar eclipse visible in Siam. He invited European scientists to see the event, and his prediction proved exact, winning him respect among Western observers. Yet the same trip led to tragedy. While watching the eclipse in the jungle, Mongkut caught malaria. He fell sick soon after and died at age 60 for leaving the throne to his son Chulalongkorn. European writers remembered him not only as a king but also as an extraordinary astronomer. Though the reforms of his reign were modest compared with what followed, Mongkut shifted the kingdom's outlook. He showed that survival in the age of empire needed more than battlefield wins. It demanded knowledge, calculated diplomacy, and the will to adapt without leaving core traditions. He even signed some of his letters as Rama IV, King of Siam Astronomer, a title that caught his double identity as ruler and scholar. In that balance of monarch and scientist lay the beginnings of Siamese strategy for modern independence. King Chulalongkorn Rama V, who ruled from 1868 to 1910, is remembered as one of Thailand's most transformative monarchs. His legacy is tied to the survival of Siam as the only Southeast Asian nation to avoid colonization. He came to the throne as a young man, raised under the influence of his father King Mongkut, who exposed him to foreign teachers, Western languages, and the idea that knowledge from abroad might be used without losing national tradition. This early preparation gave him the tools to guide his kingdom into a world ruled by European empires. One of Chulalongkorn's most important achievements was his overhaul of government. Rather than relying on the centuries-old system of sakdile, which tied a person's land status and duties to a complex ranking system, he made a more centralized administration. New ministries handled specific tasks, from foreign affairs to justice, finance and defense. He strengthened the role of a civil service, where positions were filled based on ability as much as social background. The king used advisors from both Thailand and abroad to build this structure, and his reforms reshaped the kingdom into a more modern state, less dependent on hereditary elites. His economic policies mirrored this structural change. Chulalongkorn brought land registration systems and innovation that both smoothed taxation and gave the central state a clearer hold on resources. He reformed tax collection, reducing the reliance on farming out collection to private people, a practice that often bred corruption. Under his reign, telegraph lines were set and modern banking institutions began working. Equally important was the building of state railways, which reshaped the geography of the kingdom by linking Bangkok with key provincial centers. These projects not only helped trade and administration, but also signaled to Western governments that Siam was building the kind of infrastructure linked with modern nations. Social change was also a mark of his reign, and perhaps the most famous of his reforms was the slow end of slavery. In Siam, many people had entered slavery through debt or captivity, and it had been a long-standing institution. Chulalongkorn followed a step-by-step process, starting by stopping the sale of children into bondage and slowly freeing groups of slaves. Over time, by the early 20th century, slavery had effectively vanished. That change stood out in Southeast Asia, where bondage and forced labor stayed common in neighboring lands under both local kings and colonial regimes. Chulalongkorn also moved with remarkable skill on the diplomatic stage. He visited Europe twice in 1897 and again in 1907, meeting monarchs, inspecting industries and showing Western audiences a powerful ruler who was their equal. These tours strengthened Siam's position as a sovereign state. When pressures came from Britain and France, he sometimes gave up smaller border territories, like parts of Laos and Cambodia, judging that giving up edgelands was a fair price for keeping Siam's central heartland whole. This policy kept the independence of the country at a moment when colonial encirclement seemed almost certain. Legal reform supported his diplomatic strategy. With help from foreign advisors, Siam set up a legal system that resembled Western codes. This move removed one of the common colonial excuses, the claim that Asian kingdoms lacked proper courts. By modernizing justice administration, Chulalongkorn assured Western partners that their citizens would be treated under fair laws, taking away the reason for extraterritorial privileges. This legal reorganization was both practical and symbolic, showing that Siam could stand as equal to Europe in matters of governance. The combined effect of these reforms was historic. At a time when every other kingdom in the region fell under European rule, Siam kept sovereignty by presenting itself as modern yet unmistakably Thai. This achievement is reflected in how Chulalongkorn is remembered today. His death anniversary on October 23rd is still a national holiday. Across island, statues of the king draw offerings of red roses from those who see him as a protector, a cultural hero, and the father of modern Thailand. When King Chulalongkorn passed away in 1910, his son VH, or VH, ascended the throne as Rama VI. Unlike his father, whose main concern had been warding off colonial domination, through reforms, VH or VH ruled a kingdom that had already secured its independence. His priority became shaping a stronger sense of national unity, because Siam at the time was still a mix of diverse peoples and regional traditions. VH or VH believed modernization needed not only working institutions, but also shared identity, something that would hold the kingdom together in an age when nationalism was spreading across the globe. He turned to education, symbols, and culture to achieve this. During his reign, Western-style compulsory schooling was formally introduced, making reading a growing expectation, rather than a privilege limited to monks or elites. At the same time, the founding of Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok created a national center of higher learning. The students who attended represented a new generation, literate, professional, and increasingly aware of the idea of being Thai. Schools promoted civic duty, loyalty to the monarch, and pride in the nation. Through these steps, VH or VH made education both a practical tool and a way of shaping identity. National symbols also took form during his years on the throne. In 1917, he introduced the tricolor flag with red, white, and blue stripes, still used today. The colors were meant to stand for the nation, religion, and monarchy, the three pillars of Thai statehood. Along with this flag came the strengthening of a modern military based on Western organization and discipline. Soldiers were trained not just as defenders, but also as citizens representing the values of a united state. Nationalism did not erase IMS long traditions, but added a new layer of shared identity across local and regional divisions. The influence of Europe was plain to see. English spread fast in schools and among educated classes. Literature, plays, and journalism showed strong Western influence, and political ideas like constitutionals began moving in educated circles. The Ajur Avood H himself, educated as a young man in Britain, wrote many works that blended Western forms of writing with Thai themes. Plays and translations from Shakespeare shared space with Thai language essays, all with the goal of shaping a new public culture. Siam was adapting the tools of the West, but putting them to service in building a distinctly Thai consciousness. This new national identity was tested during World War I. In 1917, Siam joined the Allies and sent medical teams and pilots to Europe. Its military contribution was small compared to large nations, but the symbolism was powerful. By standing with the victors, Siam earned a seat at the talks after the war. At Versailles, Siam stood beside Japan as the only independent Asian nations recognized on equal terms, and the event marked a high point in Siamese international status. The experience also reinforced the monarchist claim that the kingdom's modernization had earned global respect. By the late 1920s, however, growing social changes were reshaping Siam. A class of Western-educated bureaucrats and professionals had emerged. They worked in the modern ministries to taught in the new universities and saw themselves as part of a society capable of more than obedience to the throne. European ideas of constitutional government and parliamentary rule spread through this group, and many began to question the continuation of absolute monarchy. When VH or VDH died in 1925, his brother P. Rajad Hippocaus succeeded him as Rama VII. His reign quickly faced challenges. The worldwide Great Depression hurt a mess economy, cutting into income and showing weaknesses in the central government. At the same time, demands from the new middle class for reform grew louder. Unlike his ancestors, Rajad Hippocaus had fewer resources to rely on and found it harder to balance tradition with modern pressures. Change was no longer avoidable. In daily life, Bangkok itself reflected global currents. The 1922 saw silent film theaters appear across the city, as orchestras playing in night spots and students copying Western dress. Young elites walked between wooden houses along canals wearing Oxford shoes or bowler hats, moving easily between local customs and imported fashions. This cultural mixing showed the double nature of Siam at the time. Deeply rooted in ancient traditions, but eager to take part in the modern world, its kings had worked for a century to adapt to. By the early 1930s, the foundations laid by past kings were under pressure from a society that had changed faster than the monarchy itself. A generation of bureaucrats, civil servants, and young military officers had been educated in Western-style schools. Many had studied abroad, returning with new ideas about governance, national identity, and the role of ordinary citizens in shaping political life. Yet the state still rested on an absolute monarchy, where royal decision-making outweighed institutions. For these rising elites, the gap between their political vision and the reality of Siamese system grew harder to ignore. Dissatisfaction also reflected the global setting. The Great Depression had reached Siam, cutting into rice exports and state revenue. Budgets shrank, jobs vanished, and frustration spread. At court, King Rajad Hippocaus Rama VI was seen by some as cautious and unsure. He showed willingness to consider constitutional reform, but delays and limited ideas gave little confidence to reformist circles. Out of this frustration grew the Colonized or People's Party. The group was small, made of a few dozen men from civilian and military backgrounds, but they were determined. They talked quietly and made a plan to bring political change with little violence. Their vision was to end absolute rule and replace it with a constitutional monarchy, ensuring that power came from institutions and not only from tradition. They understood the risks. In regional terms, no Asian kingdom had ever moved peacefully to a parliamentary system. Their hopes were not of instant democracy, but of irreversible political change. On June 24, 1932, the plan became real. While the king was away from the center of power, members of the People's Party coordinated a quick takeover of government buildings in Bangkok. Key army units were convinced or forced to stand down. The organizers presented their statement declaring the end of absolute monarchy and the creation of a new constitutional order. The suddenness of the move caught the royal establishment by surprise. Troops loyal to the king did not move against the coup leaders and rivals, and the bureaucracy hesitated to resist. By taking the capital before opposition could form, the People's Party maximized the chance that change would hold. King Rajad Hippocaus faced the choice: resist, risking civil war, or agree. He decided to accept their demands, stating later that he had long seen reforms might be needed, but had hoped they would come in time. By accepting without bloodshed, he gained some credit as a monarch and willing to sacrifice lives for personal power. The outcome was the first peaceful shift from absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchy in Asia, starting a new era in Siam. The first constitution outlined the creation of an elected assembly, though in practice politics stayed dominated by men from the military and bureaucracy. Elections were limited and political parties hardly existed. Still, the break with centuries of tradition was deep. Titles and court ceremonies were scaled back. Authority in theory now lay with the people, though in reality it was used by a narrow elite shaped by Western ideas of governance. Tensions began right away. Questions about the role of the monarchy, the strength of parliament, and the influence of the army shaped every debate. Military factions and civilian reformists both tried to guide the new system, often coming into conflict. Coups and counter-moves would soon follow, setting a pattern of fragile constitutionalism. Siam's path in 1932 came before Japan's post-war reforms by more than a decade. For a kingdom once defined by divine kingship, the shift was extraordinary. For years afterward, June 24th was celebrated as the country's national day. Later regimes quietly removed the observance, reshaping political memory. Yet the date still carries meaning. Today, many Thais are only rediscovering its importance, seeing in the events of 1932 the roots of their nation's ongoing debate over power, tradition, and democracy. In 1939, Siam officially changed its name to Thailand under the leadership of Field Marshal Placate Ibn Song Khan, a military officer who had risen to power through his nationalist agenda. Phai Bun showed himself as a modernized, set on turning Thailand into a strong united nation state. He imposed a wave of ultranationalist policies meant to build loyalty, not just to the monarchy or the military, but to a broader sense of new Thai identity. The name change was part of this strategy, linking the state directly people, rather than to older dynastic traditions. At the same time, he admired the fascist regimes of Europe, particularly Mussolini, Italy, and believed similar authoritarian modernization could strengthen Thailand. Phai Bun encouraged Western-style clothing, banned traditional dress in public spaces, and issued cultural orders aimed at reshaping daily life. His government broadcast propaganda, insisted on the slogan "Island for the Thai," placing the nation's destiny in terms of race and unity. When World War I began in Europe, Thailand first declared its neutrality. This position, however, was challenged by geography and situation. In December 1940, Japanese forces invaded Southeast Asia, moving against British Malaya and Burma. To reach their targets fast, Japanese troops demanded passage through Thai territory. After brief fighting, Phai Bun let them cross, sparing Thailand from a full-scale conquest. Within weeks, Thailand signed a military alliance with Japan, formally joining the Axis powers. For Phai Bun's government, the alignment with Japan promised land rewards. With Japan's backing, Thailand recovered areas in Laos and Cambodia that had been given to French Indochina in earlier disputes. These gains, however, rested entirely on Japan's fortunes and could not last. Under official cooperation, resistance took shape. The Free Thai movement, known locally as Siri Thai, organized networks of opposition to Japan. Thai students and exiles abroad worked with allied governments, while secret agents worked inside Thailand itself. The movement kept contact with the United States and Britain, passing intelligence and preparing for the eventual defeat of Japan. This hidden contribution later proved key in protecting Thailand's sovereignty. By 1940, with Japan losing ground in the Pacific, support for Phai Bun weakened. He was pressured out of office, though Thailand stayed formally allied with Japan until its surrender in 1945. At wars, and Thailand faced a tricky diplomatic situation. As an Axis partner, the country risked occupation or punishment. Yet the Allies, particularly the United States, saw the importance of the Free Thai movement's efforts. On this basis, Thailand avoided the harsh treatment given to other Axis-aligned states. No foreign occupation followed, and no war crimes trials targeted Thai leaders. Instead, Thailand was restored to the international community relatively fast, though it had to return the lands gained under Japanese support. The late 1940s were marked by turbulence. Civilian governments struggled to set authority, while the military stayed deep in politics. Coups and counter-coups defined the decade, and killings of political figures shook confidence. Against this instability, the monarchy began quietly regaining importance. Since the 1932 revolution, royal influence had been cut but events pushed the crown back into public life. In 1946, Kingan and Mahedal Ramavi died unexpectedly under mysterious circumstances in the Grand Palace. His younger brother Bonibala Julidi took the throne as Rama IX. His rule would become the longest in Thai history. But in these early years, it symbolized a return of the monarchy as a stabilizing force in uncertain times. Thailand's wartime experience was unique. It was one of the few nations aligned with the Axis that escaped a light occupation and punishment. The hidden operations of the Fleet ensured its place on the winning side of history, even while its government had worked with Japan. At the same time, life under occupation saw cultural adaptations of its own. Jazz and swing music, though discouraged by Japanese authorities, survived in underground venues. Thai musicians adapted American styles and sometimes slipped coded resistance messages into their lyrics. For ordinary people, these shows expressed both defiance and hope in years of uncertainty. As the Cold War reshaped Asia, in the 1952, Thailand became a central ally for the United States. American policymakers saw the kingdom as a critical partner in containing communism in Southeast Asia. To solidify this partnership, Thailand joined the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, or SEATO, in 1950 for aligning itself formally with the United States and other anti-communist states. This organization presented itself as a collective defense pact meant to act as a counterpart to an ATO, though in practice it leaned heavily on American support. Under this arrangement, Thailand offered military facilities for U.S. forces. By the 1960s, as the Vietnam War grew, the country hosted many American air bases that became major launch points for bombing campaigns across Indochina. The scale of this presence was vast. At its peak, over 40,000 American personnel were stationed in Thailand, the largest concentration of U.S. troops in Asia outside Japan. This heavy involvement with the United States reinforced the dominance of Thailand's military rulers. During the late 1950s, Field Marshal Seret Thanayrat took power, setting an authoritarian regime with strong American backing. Seret pushed economic growth and modernization, while ruling with tight limits on political freedom. He justified military control as needed for stability against communist threats. When Seret died in 1963, his successor, the Nom Kitty Kac Horn, continued the same model of leadership, with the army at the center of political power. Backed by U.S. money and arms, these regimes crushed opposition, censored the press, and expanded internal security forces. Any hint of leftist activity was treated as a danger to national security. American aid and investment changed the economy. Billions of dollars poured into Thailand through both direct help and private business linked to the U.S. military presence. Bangkok grew fast, shifting from a traditional canal city into a modern urban hub with new infrastructure, hotels, and booming service industries. Poorer regions, especially the northeast, fell behind, and this created a visible gap between rural life and city prosperity. While the capital saw rapid modernization, vast numbers of farmers stayed tied to low-paying farm work. The inequality planted the seeds of future unrest as rural communities began to feel left out from new wealth. At the same time, the rise of modern universities nurtured a new force in Thai society, educated young people critical of military rule. Exposure to new ideas, both from Western democratic traditions and from dissatisfaction with corruption at home, inspired student groups to call for a political voice. The late 1960s and early 1970s saw growing protest, sprint publications, and underground talks around democracy, justice, and civil rights. For the younger generation, military governments no longer looked like protectors but obstacles keeping the country from reaching its potential. The turning point came on October 14, 1973. Tens of thousands of students, joined by ordinary citizens, marched in Bangkok demanding change. When violence broke out between protesters and security forces, the city erupted into confrontation. The scale of public involvement was unlike anything before. Faced with crisis, the Nong Kitty K. A.C. Horn was forced to resign and flee abroad, ending nearly 20 years of set military dominance. For Thai civil society, this moment became a milestone remembered as proof that mass action could overthrow authoritarian rule. Yet the region reminded Thailand of the risks of going too far. In 1975, communist forces won in Laos, Vietnam and Cambodia. The domino effect that US policymakers had long feared was now reality in the countries bordering Thailand. The Thai government answered by tightening security policies, again determined to crush leftist movements and stop communist influence at home. The following years saw a mix of democratic rise and military interventions, reflecting a nation caught between ideals of freedom and the weight of geopolitical fears. Cultural life told a parallel story. American presence brought consumer product entertainment and fashion into daily Thai experience. Elvis Presley songs, Coca-Cola, a bottle's Hollywood films and blue jeans became symbols of modernity among the young. Ironically, many of the same students who embraced these items were also challenging US-backed regimes in protest. In this way, Cold War Thailand showed both the reach of American influence and the determination of its own people to shape their political future. Its history is one of deliberate reinvention, where kingdoms rose from ashes, leaders walked the tightrope between reform and tradition, and outside pressures were absorbed, reshaped, and made uniquely Thai. This endurance was not about isolation. It was about cultural mastery, the ability to blend and adapt without losing soul. Understanding how Thailand stayed independent through colonial storms and global upheaval changes how we see world history itself. And so this chapter of history slowly fades into the quiet flow of time. Some mysteries remain unanswered, and some truths continue to shape our world. We have walked through the past together and learned what it can teach us. If you carry this knowledge forward with you through each day, then the echoes of history will never be lost. Thank you for listening. Until next time, let the past remain alive in your mind.